Welcome once again to Against the Spread, where we here at Sportsnet bring you via YouTube our NFL picks against the spread. This is the preview edition. In a couple weeks, we're going to be doing that, giving you the picks against the spread as the season starts. Right now, we're just going to pick our division winners, our wild cards, and eventually our Super Bowl. And Gilo, let's start with the AFC because we're relatively chalk on the AFC. The NFC is where there's some discrepancy.
Yeah, sure. I mean, what division do you want to start off with? I got to say, I've never been so unsure of predictions, and they're fickle at the best of times, right? But I have no idea. I'm kind of just going with my gut here. But yeah, where do you want to start?
Why don't we start with a layup and the defending champions, who I think we both believe will defend their crown in the AFC West, in the Kansas City Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes is a lot richer this season. He will not have Laurent Duvernay-Tardif protecting him, but still the Chiefs, despite some improvement via the draft in the division, the Chiefs are still a class of the AFC West for me.
Yeah, I think this was a no-brainer and probably the biggest no-brainer of all the divisions. I think we'll probably see some improvement among teams like the Broncos. I think the Raiders will probably be a bit better, and I'm unsure about the Chargers with Tyrod Taylor. I like them, but I don't know about the big play capability. But I mean, the Chiefs, they locked up their core. They didn't really lose anybody outside of Duvernay-Tardif. That's a pretty big loss. But in terms of big playmakers, they've only locked up those guys rather than seen anyone go, and they have to be the favorites. I mean, the only thing, and fingers crossed, this obviously doesn't happen, but the only thing that I could see derailing them from another division title would be an injury to somebody who they rely on week in and week out.
Agreed. And I feel the same way for the next team I'm going to pick. Even though I think their division is much more competitive and is probably going to be the most competitive in the conference, and that's the AFC North. And I think Baltimore wins it again, backed by the MVP, Lamar Jackson. He had the most touchdown passes in the league, partially because of the injury of Patrick Mahomes, but he also threw the fewest passes. They're so prolific offensively. I do think Pittsburgh and Cleveland, with some better coaching, will give them a bit of a scare. But for me, I think the Ravens are still the class, not only of that division. I think they're the biggest threat to the Chiefs, and they're going to face them in the conference championships. Who do you have coming out of the AFC North?
Yeah, I got the same, and it's almost as big of a no-brainer as the Chiefs is, and I think, they suffered another pretty devastating playoff loss last winter, and this doesn't strike me, at least, as the type of team that would you take a step back because of something like that. Like John Harbaugh, one of the best coaches in the NFL and a great leader. And we've seen from Lamar Jackson the type of leader that he can be. So I expect that they'll use that as fuel. And from a roster standpoint, they've only gotten better. They've made good additions, veteran additions to the defensive line. And then J.K. Dobbins had, a potential star running back to a backfield that was already a record-breaking backfield. And I can just imagine this team running all over everybody all over again. I expect Jackson to be a better passer too. This offense will be really good, and the defense has improved despite the loss of Earl Thomas earlier this week. But he's far from the player he used to be, so I don't see that hurting them all that much. But from an offensive standpoint, I expect this team to somehow take a step forward.
I love adding Dobbins as well. Calais Campbell helps that defense, as you mentioned. I do think the Ravens are primed for another big year. We've gone pretty much chalk. We've got the same, but also the same as what we saw in 2019. Let's mix things up a bit. In a division that you thought would always be the same, but maybe not anymore, the AFC East. And that's right, circle the wagons. I'm picking the Buffalo Bills to win the AFC East. I'm laughing as I say it.
I know, it's hard to imagine.
Hopefully I'm not jinxing Bills fans, which I've been known to do in this very segment. But I still have massive questions about Josh Allen. He's the second worst QB, in terms of throwing deep, passes over 20 yards. His completion percentage was 30.9. The only starter that was worse than that was Kyle Allen, and he's no longer a starter. But I love the addition of Diggs, who gets, more than half of his yards on passes, 20 plus downfield, and all 6 of his touchdowns a year ago. I also love the extension of Sean McDermott. They're well run, they're well coached, and they've been really smart via the draft and free agency. So I look for them to take the next step and finally, win the AFC East and bring that crown back to Buffalo.
Yeah, when it comes to the AFC East, I'm always hesitant because obviously the Patriots, and then the other thing is we've never been able to really trust the Bills. I've always wanted to. I know you've done the same, and it's come back to bite us in a lot of ways. But last year was a bit different, and then this year, you mentioned Josh Allen. I think that's the only question mark that this team has. Like, he's good and he'll make plays and he'll win them some games, but then also he makes some mistakes. But they've got great leadership again with Sean McDermott, Brandon Beane. We know how good that defense is, and it's probably only going to get better. They too, like the Ravens, made some good additions to the defensive line, which was probably their weakest place on defense last year. And Diggs. I mean, John Brown and Cole Beasley are good, but they never had that number one guy last year. Diggs gives them that, one of the best route runners in the NFL and just a big playmaker. And as long as Josh Allen can get them the ball and they have a good running game too. So if he can do that, not turn the ball over, not go crazy, like we saw him do in that wild card game against the Texans, then I think this is theirs to lose.
AFC South, you mentioned some of the continuity that Buffalo has. I'm picking Tennessee for that very reason. In a season that's abbreviated in terms of the OTAs and the offseason and what that looks like, and you're not really going to get any preseason games, and basically some glorified padded practices are going to be your dress rehearsal. I love the continuity with Tennessee, and Arthur Smith has done a great job as their offensive coordinator, calling plays, putting Ryan Tannehill in a position to succeed. And when you talk about, an explosive backfield, and when we think the AFC, we think of Baltimore, we think of Kansas City, but Tennessee, quietly kept, could have a Pro Bowler at quarterback and a Pro Bowler at running back, and that offensive talent and a well-coached and strong defense is why I see them winning the AFC South once again.
Yeah, this is going to be the first place where we differ. I like Tennessee. And I really like the coaching staff there, and I like what they're probably going to do on defense. But I don't trust Derrick Henry and Ryan Tannehill enough yet to believe that they're going to do the same thing that they did last year. And I mean, let's remember, they went 9-7. They're going to have to not only continue what they did last year, but then build on that a little bit in order to win a division that's going to be really tough. My pick is the Colts. I really like this team. You and I both picked this team way too much last year. They burned us a bunch. But I think Phillip Rivers, who, from everything that we've heard, and we're hearing very little in this training camp, but they really like Phillip Rivers there, and he's doing a lot of good stuff. And the defense is really good. They've got arguably the best offensive line in the NFL, and now they have Jonathan Taylor to add to Marlon Mack. I think there's going to be a heavy running game there, a lot of play action, and Phillip Rivers slinging it. And I think they have enough with a good coaching staff as well to win this division after, the Texans had a pretty questionable offseason. I expect Deshaun Watson to get this team in a playoff spot, the Texans in a playoff spot, but I don't know that they'll be the division winning team. So I'm going to go with the Colts. I like them.
See, you mentioned we picked the Colts far too often last year, and it hurt us. I also picked the Chargers far too often last year, and it hurt me as well. And I just don't think Phillip Rivers, who wasn't able to get a Chargers team with some good offensive pieces, playing good football, I'm not certain he's going to be able to do much more in Indianapolis, even though it's a much better fit in terms of quarterback and offensive play caller. So not only do I not have the Colts winning the division, I don't even have the Colts making the playoffs. I don't have them as one of my wild card teams.
Wow, even with the opened up wild card.
Even with the opened up wild card. And so we will differ in terms of our wild card teams. Nice. We'll do a lightning round.
Sure.
go through your wild card teams quickly. Who are the 3 teams getting in for you on wild card weekend?
Yeah, so first off, I think this is going to be crazy tight. And this is the one, this wild card AFC is where I've gone so back and forth since submitting these picks on Thursday. I mean, it could be anybody, but I'm going Texans. I think they're going to be the top wild card, have a good enough quarterback. And when I say good enough, I mean he's constantly going to be an MVP candidate in Deshaun Watson. Next, I've got the Broncos. I'm drinking that Kool-Aid, and I don't even really know why. And then another kind of potential pick here, I want the Browns to be that 3rd pick. They were so hyped last year. The coaching, as you mentioned earlier, was really bad. But now they've got a good leader in Kevin Stefanski, and I think they'll have the offense to get it done. They've suffered a couple pretty big defensive injuries over the last couple of days with Mac Wilson, and then today Grant Delpit has a torn Achilles and he's out for the season. But I think they'll have enough offensive firepower to get it going, and they sneak in. But I think it's going to be so tight for that 3rd and 2nd wild card in the AFC.
So we agree on a team that I didn't think we were going to, and that's the Cleveland Browns. I'm actually really surprised that I have the New England Patriots making the playoffs.
You do.
And then for me, that other team that makes it in is Pittsburgh. They were 8-5 last year, before they lost, every game down the stretch. But they were in pole position, and then just the injuries caught up with them. Now they've got, Big Ben Roethlisberger back, and you're not getting, below average play from Mason Rudolph. You've got already a top 5 defense, and Mike Tomlin, and a good running game, assuming, that the backfield is healthy. I like Pittsburgh to get in as well. So that's who I've got in that wild card spot in the AFC. Let's turn the page to the NFC, where we differed on the wild cards. We're going to differ all over the place in the NFC. And how about we start with the defending NFC champs, the San Francisco 49ers in the NFC West, because I do think, again, even though they're going to have more competition in the NFC West, I think once again Kyle Shanahan and company win that division. I just think even though they've lost some integral pieces in free agency, their too deep is so dangerous, so big, so physical that I really like that football team. And the Niners, again, are going to be real good.
Yeah, I agree they're going to be good, but I think this year Seattle will get the better of that rivalry. And I think the NFC West is probably going to be the most competitive division in the NFL, because I think I could see any of those teams. Maybe, Arizona, I'm hyping them up a little bit too much, but I could see any of those teams really winning that division. But I like Seattle here. I think, any team that has Russell Wilson, and it's kind of like Deshaun Watson, you've got a consistent MVP type player, and he's got some really good weapons around him with Tyler Lockett, and Metcalf had a huge rookie season. And then, they got Jamal Adams, and what was already a really good defense now gets even better by from a playmaker from his talent level. And, say what you will about what they gave up, but short term, that's a great add. And so San Fran got the better of Seattle in those 2 games that they played last year, but I think it's going to be the other way around, and I think they win this division. But it's going to be pretty tight. Like both these teams could win 11 or 12 games, but I think Seattle squeaks it out.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Seattle wins 11 or 12 games, and that's why I have them as my top wild card team, and a team that, congratulations for winning your division. You're going to have to play them in the first round of the playoffs, which would be very, very difficult. And we've seen with them in the past that like home road doesn't really matter that much to Pete Carroll's team. Let's move to the NFC North, where I've got Green Bay winning the division. I think they played a little bit above their heads last year. I'm still not sure why they didn't draft a wide receiver for Aaron Rodgers, because if they did, I think we'd be having a conversation on whether or not they could potentially get out of the NFC and win a Super Bowl, and that's not something that I'm here to tell you is going to happen. Their over-under is at 9. I do think that they're going to get past that number, but I just think because they didn't draft a wide receiver, and specifically they drafted their future quarterback, I'm expecting a FU season, if you will, from Aaron Rodgers. They're really, really spraying the ball over the place. Now, from a play calling standpoint, they've really taken the ball out of his hands a lot. and reverted to more of a running team. But I do think that, at this stage and age of his career, he'll be dialed in, and that's why I think the Packers win the division, where the other offenses are meh. Like Vikings have a devastating running game, but still I have questions about the other offenses in the division, and that's why I think Green Bay wins it quite easily.
Those are all fair points, but I'm going to go with the Vikings because when I think about the Packers, I have a bad taste in my mouth from that showing in the NFC title game, and I think we talked a lot last year, and a lot of this is based off last year, but what else do we know? But we talked a lot about how they played over their heads. A 13-win team that probably didn't, may have been one of the worst 13-win teams we've ever seen, and yeah, they've had a weird offseason when they could have added weapons for Aaron Rodgers after giving him a long-term contract. They instead draft his replacement, which is really bizarre. And like you said, Rodgers is the wild card. If he can go off, if he's angry, they could definitely win 13 games again. But I like the Vikings. I like the running game a lot. I think Dalvin Cook's going to have something to prove. He wants a long-term deal. And I think, they did lose Stephon Diggs, but Justin Jefferson will jump right in there and he'll do a really good job at that position as well. And Adam Thielen's got to have a bounce back year after an injury-plagued season last year. So again, kind of like we were talking about with the NFC West, this is going to be a tight division. And we could even see the Lions maybe make a push here too, if they can stay healthy. But I think the Vikings are going to squeeze it out. And then another NFC North team get into one of those wild card spots.
So as people who watch this series often know, we often disagree on the NFC East, and that's partially because of some allegiances to our favorite teams. Yep. So let's end on the NFC East and go to the South, because I think we do agree on the South, even though I think it's going to be competitive at the top between Tampa Bay and Tom Brady. I don't have a lot of faith in Atlanta, even though they've got a former MVP quarterback in Matt Ryan. I still think the NFC South goes through New Orleans. I love what they've done in free agency, adding to an already talented wide receiver group. And so I think Sean Payton and Drew Brees once again win the South.
Yeah, I agree. I think from top to bottom, they probably have the deepest, best roster in the NFL. And that's what makes them able to survive a Drew Brees injury like we saw last year. And so I think, Tom Brady's now in a really tough division, which he's never really been in before. And I think the Bucs are going to be able to get in, but I don't think they're going to win this division. I like the Saints, and I like the Saints to make a really deep run here. I think, again, last year, kind of like the Ravens, they went out in a ball of flames, and I think they're going to have motivation, especially if this is Brees last year, to get him another ring. And I really like what they did, like you said, in the offseason. So I'm with the Saints here.
Yeah, their insurance now, if Brees gets hurt, is not just Taysom Hill, who they brought back, but Jameis Winston, a guy who, threw for 5,000 yards. I don't love him as a starter, but he is, pretty good as a backup if you've got someone with that type of arm talent. Quarterback was a point of conversation for the team that I'm picking in the NFC East, and that would be the Dallas Cowboys. But I'm actually picking them, and they are, my favorite team. So I'm gonna be upset that I'm jinxing them by picking them. But I'm actually picking them for actually what they've done on the other side of the ball. I like the Mike McCarthy, signing as a head coach only because his name is not Jason Garrett, and I would have liked anybody that's not Jason Garrett. But Mike Nolan, who comes with him, and they've been tied together in the past, now runs that defense, and they had 7 interceptions last year. Not only was it tied for the fewest in the league, it's tied for the fewest in franchise history. Well, how do you change that? You either change your secondary, which is tough to do, or you get some pass rush, which is something that they were able to do. And so you're hoping DeMarcus Lawrence bounces back and has more of a traditional year from him, but around him you get Everson Griffin. Late you got Aldon Smith, who, if motivated and is his return back to the sport, is a high level producer. His issues have been his personal demons, not his play on the field. Dontori Poe, the anchor of a defensive line is really nice. Gerald McCoy looked like a nice signing, but randomly they had a clause in his deal that if he happened to have a quad injury, that they can get out of the deal. And guess what? He had a quad injury, so they're out of the deal, which frees up some cap money potentially for Earl Thomas, who is not certainly the Legion of Boom Earl Thomas, but would be an upgrade at safety. And again, a guy with 30 career interceptions, a team that only had 7 last year could use them, assuming that happens. But regardless, I think that changes what their ceiling is, but I do think the floor will be good enough to beat the Eagles, the only real challenger in the division, and win the NFC East. But I sense you disagree.
I do disagree. I've got to say, back to what you were kind of talking about there, that I think the Cowboys have a really good roster. I mean, it's undeniable, right? Especially on offense. Like, them landing CeeDee Lamb, is the steal of the draft, in my opinion. And watching him go off the board as the Eagles were kind of a couple spots down in desperate need of a wide receiver was tough to watch. And I was angry, I can't lie. But the other thing that you said earlier was continuity. And that's the one thing that the Eagles have in the NFC East that nobody else has, right? Every other team underwent a head coaching change. Every other team has to put in a new system in an offseason unlike any we've ever seen. And in Philadelphia, they have the same offense they've had since 2016. They have the same defense they've had since 2016. They have a quarterback that they've had since 2016. And they just, I think that gives them at least a game or two advantage, right? Where the Cowboys a little bit to Mike McCarthy's offense, or what could be a wildly changed defense under Mike Nolan. The Eagles don't have to do that. So as much as I also feel like I'm probably jinxing the Eagles, I just like their chances. I do think also that this is going to be super tight. So tight that probably the loser doesn't get a wild card, because the NFC is super deep. And we saw last year how bad these two teams can be when it comes down to it. So if one of them wins 10 games, the other one could conceivably miss out because the NFC is really deep. But I like the Eagles because of the continuity. I think that plays a huge factor.
So now I'm very intrigued on who your wild card teams are, because for all the reasons that you described, I have Philly as a wild card team. We talked about Seattle earlier. I have them as a wild card team. And so I'm just going to say my other wild card team is Tampa Bay, only because they were 6th in pass percentage last year. Now they have arguably the greatest passer in the history of sport, and Tom Brady, throwing as much with Bruce Arians. He's got more offensive talent at his disposal than he's ever had in his career. So I do like them, even though I do think him transitioning to a new team, new system for the first time in the COVID era, not ideal, but it didn't really stop him from passing on air all throughout quarantine anyways. So I think Tampa Bay is the other wild card team. But I want to cede the rest of my time to you, because I'm fascinated who your wild card teams are.
Sure, yeah. So the first one's going to be the 49ers, because like I said earlier, I think both them and Seattle can win, 11 or 12 games. The second one, I've got the Bucks. And then I'm going to go with the Packers for the third one, because I think, regardless of me not truly believing in what they did last year, they are a really good team, and they do have Aaron Rodgers. I think that all three of those teams could win double-digit games and be wildcard teams. That's what's kind of crazy about the NFC, and that's why I don't think at this point in time that a second NFC East team is going to get in, just because those teams tend to beat up on each other, and there could be 6 or 7 losses for that second team.
The crazy thing for me is, some of those wildcard teams that we mentioned, I would not be surprised if, like, when Packers won their last Super Bowl, one of them got hot, went on a run, and won the Super Bowl from the wild card position. So having said that, let's pick our Super Bowl teams. In the AFC, I've got the Baltimore Ravens. I do think that all year, whatever Lamar Jackson does, people will say, okay, that's nice. Show me in the playoffs. And so I do think that this is going to be his coming out party in the postseason. And I do think, as much as I love the Chiefs and their offense, I do think that, we've seen a bit of a hangover effect for teams who are in the Super Bowl. Sometimes it's often the team that loses the Super Bowl, but they take a step back. And so repeating is really tough in the sport. And that's why I think I like Baltimore coming out of the AFC and winning it. And I really struggled with the NFC, and I went back and forth between New Orleans and that stacked roster, and the Niners, and for me, like a stacked coaching staff and really a stacked organization. So I don't really feel good about it either way, but I'm going to say the Saints are the team that gets there, and the Ravens are the one that ends up winning it. Who do you got?
Yeah, not much drama here because I actually have the exact same pick. I like the Ravens. Like you said, I think they are going to use that loss and all that talk that's inevitable to their advantage, and they're going to ride that. And like you said about the Chiefs, it's so hard to repeat. It's such a grueling game, and the odds of it are so slim that I think me picking a back-to-back AFC championship is just so improbable that it makes no sense. Saints, deep roster, love the team. I think, again, they're going to be fueled by an early playoff loss last season and winning one for Drew. So I think outside of all of those, I also think this is the most fun possible. And when we're doing a prediction show in the most unpredictable of seasons, I just look at what would be the most fun outside of the Eagles, because that's just an immediate jinx. What would be the most fun that I would have watching a game come February? And this was what I came up with. And I'm even going to pick a winner. I like the Ravens, and I like Lamar to go off for Super Bowl MVP.
I like the Ravens as well, and I like Lamar as Super Bowl MVP. So either we're going to be geniuses, or we're going to have people in the state of Maryland really, really upset at us. But we're going to be doing it just like this all throughout the year. Check back with us in 2 weeks as the season is just around the corner. You mentioned it. It's going to be a wild, unpredictable season. We're not just going to be talking about injuries. We're probably going to be talking about positives and false positives and how that impacts the line in betting. So if there is ever a year you want to really pay attention to what the lines are, what the spreads are, and who you should favor, this is the one. So we'll be here to walk you through it. It'll be fun. Thanks for this, Geoff.
Thanks, Donnovan.